I am Corbett, 62 years old, and I never thought my worn band t-shirt would become the center of family drama. The shirt my late wife Margaret gave me back in '82 might look faded to others, but to me it carries our whole history. When my son-in-law Blake mocked it as trashy during Thanksgiving dinner, I stayed silent while everyone watched. That silence would speak volumes just 48 hours later. If you are watching this from somewhere where family still respects their elders, hit that subscribe button. I wish I lived there too. Let me take you back to last Thanksgiving, when I learned that sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Construction work shaped my hands and my life for over 40 years. Every callus tells a story of building this city skyline, providing for my family, and creating something meant to last. After Margaret passed away 5 years ago from cancer, those physical reminders of what I had built became even more important, because the most important thing I had built was slipping away from me. My daughter Amanda was our only child. We had her later in life when Margaret was 35 and I was 37. We poured everything into raising her right, making sure she had opportunities neither of us had growing up. She was always brilliant, determined from an early age to become an attorney. We scraped together every penny for her education, and I took on extra shifts that stretched my back to its breaking point, but seeing her graduate from law school made it all worthwhile. Then she met Blake Harrison at her law firm. He was 38 now, a financial analyst from old money who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his Harvard Business School pedigree. Tall with perfectly styled hair that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who has never worried about making rent. Amanda fell hard for him, and within a year they were engaged. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at a country club I felt out of place in. I remember tugging at my rented tux collar all night while Blake's family exchanged knowing glances whenever I spoke. When I gave my speech about working hard and taking care of each other, Blake's father later commented that it was quaint, like I was some kind of folksy sideshow. My modest 2-bedroom ranch house outside the city felt increasingly distant from Amanda's new life in their 5-bedroom colonial in the affluent north suburbs. The grandkids, Emma and Liam, 8 and 6, were growing up in a world completely foreign to the one where I raised their mother. Their playroom alone was bigger than Amanda's childhood bedroom. The t-shirt that caused all the trouble was my most treasured possession, though you would never know it by looking at it. Faded black with a tour graphic for the Rolling Stones. 1982 American Tour. It was the first gift Margaret ever gave me. We were just dating then, both 20 years old, and she had saved for weeks from her waitressing job to buy tickets and matching shirts. It was our first concert together, and I can still remember her on my shoulders singing at the top of her lungs to Brown Sugar while the lights flashed around us. We wore those shirts until they were threadbare, and after she passed, I kept hers folded in my dresser drawer, while mine became a comfort item I wore at home. Blake had always made little comments about my background. Nothing directly insulting, but small jabs disguised as jokes. He would talk about his golf game, then turn to me and say, "I bet you never had time for golf, did you, Corbett? Too busy working with your hands." Or he would mention his wine collection to dinner guests, then add, "My father-in-law is more of a beer man, right?" Nothing wrong with simple tastes. Each comment served to emphasize the difference between us with the clear implication that his way was superior. Amanda would sometimes give him a look, but never contradicted him directly. I could see her caught between the world she came from and the one she aspired to belong to now. It hurt, but I told myself that all that mattered was that she was happy and successful. This Thanksgiving, I almost declined the invitation. The thought of sitting through another meal of subtle put-downs while trying to maintain my dignity was exhausting. But Emma had called specifically to ask if Grandpa would come see her turkey hand drawing, and I could never say no to those kids. So I decided to go, and in a moment that I would later question, I put on my comfortable clothes, including that treasured Rolling Stones t-shirt under a flannel shirt. It was a holiday after all, and Margaret would have been there if she could. Wearing it made me feel like she was still with me somehow. I pulled up to Amanda and Blake's house in my 15-year-old Ford pickup, which looked comically out of place next to the luxury vehicles lining their circular driveway. Their home stood 3 stories tall with large columns framing the front entrance, more like a small hotel than a family home. Fall decorations tastefully arranged around their property probably cost more than my monthly pension check. The moment Emma and Liam spotted me coming up the walkway, they burst through the front door, racing toward me with open arms. Grandpa, Emma shouted, her blonde pigtails bouncing. I made a special place card for you at the table. Liam crashed into my legs, nearly knocking me off balance. Did you bring your toolbox? Can we build something in the garage after dinner? Their enthusiasm warmed my heart in the chilly November air. I bent down, ignoring the crack in my knee, and hugged them both. I left my toolbox at home today, buddy, but I promise next time we can build whatever you want. Blake appeared in the doorway, martini in hand, watching our interaction with a tight smile that did not reach his eyes. Corbett, he nodded curtly. Glad you could make it. Kids, do not wrinkle your clothes before the photographer arrives. Photographer, I asked as I walked up the steps. Blake sighed like I had asked something ridiculous. For the family Christmas card, of course. The photographer will be here in an hour to capture some candid Thanksgiving moments. We do it every year. Every year since they had been married, he meant. 3 years was hardly a tradition, but I just nodded and followed him inside. The interior of their home always reminded me of a magazine spread rather than a lived-in space. The open-concept main floor featured gleaming hardwood white furniture that seemed impossible to keep clean with 2 young children, and abstract art pieces that probably had deep meaning to someone somewhere. The air smelled of cinnamon and sage, the scent of Thanksgiving dinner being prepared not by Amanda, but by the personal chef they had hired for the occasion. Blake's parents, Richard and Veronica Harrison, were already there holding crystal glasses of champagne while seated on the white sofa. Richard was tall and lean like his son, with silver hair and the permanent tan of someone who spent winters at their Florida home. Veronica had the tight, smooth face of someone fighting aging, with expensive procedures, her blonde hair styled perfectly. Corbett, Veronica acknowledged me with the slight nod one might give a delivery person. You look well. Richard did not even stand to shake my hand. Blake mentioned you are still in that same house. Ever thought about one of those retirement communities? They have some nice ones now, even for people on fixed incomes. I am quite happy where I am, thank you, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. My neighbors still need someone who knows how to fix a leaky pipe without charging an arm and a leg. How quaint, Veronica said, exchanging a glance with Richard. Blake's brother Trevor and his wife Stephanie arrived next, both looking like they had stepped out of a country club brochure in matching blue outfits. Trevor worked at the same financial firm as Blake, a position that Blake had helped him secure, a fact he mentioned at every family gathering. The final guests were Amanda's colleagues from her law firm, Jackson and his wife Rachel, and Diane, a single attorney who had recently made partner. They arrived together, all carrying expensive bottles of wine as host gifts. I watched Amanda fluttering between guests, making sure everyone had drinks, looking elegant and polished in a burgundy dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She gave me a quick hug when I arrived, but was quickly pulled away by Veronica asking about the table settings. During the pre-dinner mingling, I mainly talked with my grandchildren, helping them with a Thanksgiving word search, while the adults discussed vacation homes and recent high-profile legal cases. At one point, I took off my flannel button-up because the house was warm, revealing my old band t-shirt underneath. I noticed Blake's eye twitch when he saw it, but he was engaged in conversation with Jackson about golf club memberships and did not say anything immediately. When the personal chef announced dinner was ready, we all moved to the dining room. The table was a showcase of excess fine china crystal glasses, sterling silver, and elaborate floral centerpieces created a setting more formal than many weddings I had attended. Name cards directed everyone to their seats, and I noticed mine was placed at the far end, away from Amanda and the children between Diane and Stephanie. Liam noticed too. "Why is Grandpa sitting all the way down there?" "The adults need to discuss some business matters, Liam. You will see Grandpa after dinner." The chef began bringing out the first course, a butternut squash soup served in what looked like shallow bowls made of porcelain, so fine it was nearly translucent. As the server placed mine in front of me, Blake stood up, wine glass in hand. "Before we begin, I would like to welcome everyone to our home for what I am sure will be the first of many memorable holidays together," he said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone used to giving presentations. "This has been an exceptional year for us." Amanda made junior partner. "I secured the Westridge account, and we have just been accepted into the Lakeview Country Club." A round of congratulations circulated the table. I smiled and nodded, genuinely happy for my daughter's professional success, even as I felt increasingly out of place in her life. Blake continued gesturing with his wine glass. "Family traditions are important to us, which is why we wanted to create this special Thanksgiving experience." That was when his gaze fell deliberately on me, his smile tightening. Though it seemed some of us did not get the memo about the dress code. The table went quiet. Amanda looked up sharply. "I mean, really?" Corbett Blake continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Couldn't you have dressed properly for once? That trashy t-shirt belongs in the garage, not at my dinner table." Everyone else made an effort. The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica pursed her lips in agreement, while Richard shook his head slightly. Trevor looked embarrassed for me, while Stephanie suddenly found her napkin fascinating. Amanda's colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. "What is wrong with Grandpa's shirt?" Emma asked innocently, breaking the tension. Blake ignored her. "This is exactly what I mean about respecting the occasion," he continued. "Some people just do not understand social standards." Amanda finally spoke, her voice tight. "Blake, that is enough." But the damage was done. I could feel every eye on me, on my worn t-shirt that looked so out of place among their finery. The shirt that carried my most precious memories reduced to trashy in front of everyone. Inside, I felt a storm of emotions, humiliation burning my cheeks, anger tightening my throat, and deep disappointment that my daughter had allowed this to happen in her home. For a moment, I considered getting up and leaving, or perhaps explaining the significance of the shirt. Instead, I chose silence. I picked up my spoon, tasted the soup, and said simply, "This is delicious." I continued eating as if nothing had happened. Across the table, Blake seemed taken aback by my lack of reaction. He had clearly expected me to either defend myself or leave in embarrassment. When I did neither, he seemed unsure how to proceed. The conversation eventually resumed, though the atmosphere remained strained. Throughout the meal, I caught Blake watching me with a triumphant smirk. In his mind, he had put me in my place, the uncultured father-in-law who did not belong in his sophisticated world. Little did he know what the next 48 hours would bring. I left earlier than planned, around 8:30, claiming fatigue. In truth, I could not bear another minute of the strained atmosphere, the sideways glances, and Blake's smug expression. Despite Amanda's protests that we hadn't had dessert yet, I kissed my grandchildren goodbye and promised to see them soon. Emma clung to my leg. "Why are you leaving, Grandpa?" "Is it because Daddy was mean about your shirt?" Out of the mouths of babes. I knelt down to her level. "No, sweetie. Grandpa is just tired. Old bones need more rest. I will see you very soon, I promise." Liam looked confused. "But you always stay for pumpkin pie. Mom said it is your favorite." "I will have her save me a piece," I assured him, though I doubted anyone would bother. As I drove home in silence, the windshield wipers beating against a light drizzle that had started, I felt a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with the rich food. Years of working through injuries, of lifting beams and climbing scaffolding in all weather conditions, had never left me feeling as worn down as that single comment about my shirt. It wasn't just the shirt, of course. It was what it represented. The dismissal of my entire life, my memories, my identity as something trashy and embarrassing. The implied message that I was something to be tolerated rather than respected in my daughter's new life. My small house welcomed me with familiar creaks and shadows. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, a simple routine that felt comforting in its ordinariness. In the bedroom, I carefully removed the Rolling Stones t-shirt and looked at it in the dim light. The graphic was faded, the black now a soft charcoal gray, the cotton thin from countless washes. I could almost smell Margaret's perfume on it, though that was surely just my imagination after all these years. I folded it gently and placed it back in my drawer. Tomorrow would be another day. The next morning I woke to bright sunlight streaming through my windows. I had slept better than expected, perhaps, because my mind had already begun formulating a response to Blake's behavior, though I wasn't fully conscious of it yet. As I was finishing my second cup of coffee, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Walter Richards, a name that brought an immediate smile to my face. Walter and I had gone to high school together before taking very different paths in life. While I went straight into construction, Walter got an engineering degree and eventually started his own construction equipment company that had grown into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Despite his success, he had never forgotten his roots or his old friends. Corbett Walter's booming voice filled my kitchen. "How the hell are you, old friend?" I found myself genuinely laughing for the first time in days. "Walter, good to hear your voice. I am getting by. What has you calling so early? It is almost 10, you lazy bum. Some of us have been up since 5. Listen, I am calling about the reunion planning committee. We are meeting tomorrow, and Frank had to drop out because his daughter had a baby. We need another voice of reason to stop Debbie Patterson from turning this into another one of her extravaganzas. You and our 45th high school reunion was coming up in spring, though I hadn't planned on attending. After Margaret died, social events had become something to endure rather than enjoy. I do not know, Walter. I am not much for parties these days. Walter would not be deterred. That is exactly why you need to come. Look, just meet me for lunch today at the Capitol Grill downtown. We will talk about it, no pressure. I am buying. The Capitol Grill was exactly the kind of upscale restaurant Blake would frequent. On my own, I would never go there, but Walter had a way of steamrolling objections. Fine, I sighed. What time? 12:30. And wear something nice. They have a dress code. Walter chuckled. After hanging up, I showered and found my one good suit in the back of the closet. It was slightly out of style and a bit loose since I had lost weight after Margaret died, but it was well made and dignified. I even polished my dress shoes, something I had not bothered with in years. The Capitol Grill was in the financial district, housed in the ground floor of a gleaming skyscraper my company had helped build 20 years earlier. As I walked through the revolving door into the wood-paneled interior, with its crisp white tablecloths and attentive staff, I felt a peculiar sense of belonging. I had helped create the very foundation this place stood on, even if I rarely had occasion to enjoy its fruits. Walter was already at a table, his large frame making even the substantial dining chair look small. His hair had gone completely white, but his handshake was as firm as ever, and his smile just as genuine. "Corbett, you old dog. You clean up nice when you try." He stood to embrace me with a bear hug that nearly knocked the wind out of me. We ordered drinks, Walter insisting on a bottle of red wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week. "So tell me what is really going on," Walter said once the waiter had left. "Your voice on the phone sounded like someone ran over your dog." I rarely kept anything from Walter, and found myself recounting the Thanksgiving dinner incident, including the significance of the T-shirt. Walter's face darkened as I spoke. "This son-in-law sounds like a real piece of work," he said, swirling his wine. "What does Amanda say about how he treats you?" I shrugged. "She is caught in the middle. I do not want to make it harder for her." Walter started to respond when his attention was caught by something over my shoulder. His expression shifted to one of surprised recognition. "Well, speak of the devil," he muttered. I turned slightly to see what he was looking at, and felt my stomach drop. Across the restaurant, at a large round table, sat Blake with 3 other men in expensive suits engaged in what appeared to be a business lunch. They had laptops and documents spread before them, leaning in with serious expressions. Walter noticed my reaction. "You know those guys, the one on the far left is my son-in-law," I admitted quietly. Walter raised an eyebrow, then a slow, almost predatory smile spread across his face. "Blake Harrison, you know him?" I asked, surprised. Walter chuckled softly. "His firm has been pitching to acquire the contract for my company's expansion. 5 buildings across the country, including the new headquarters here in Chicago. It would be the biggest commercial deal of the year. He has been sending me proposals for weeks." I felt a chill run down my spine. Walter's company, Richards Equipment and Development, was one of the largest construction equipment suppliers in the Midwest, and his expansion plans had been featured in the business section of the Chicago Tribune. Before I could respond, Walter signaled to our waiter. "Sir, would you mind telling that gentleman in the blue suit that Walter Richards would like to say hello when he has a moment?" "Walter, I do not think I started," but he waved me off. "Just wait," he said with a gleam in his eye. A few minutes later, Blake approached our table, his professional smile firmly in place until he saw me sitting across from Walter. His step faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Mr. Richards, what a pleasant surprise," he said, extending his hand to Walter, while pointedly ignoring me. "I did not know you frequented the Capitol Grill." "Best steaks in the city," Walter replied, shaking Blake's hand firmly. "I believe you know my good friend Corbett." Blake could hardly pretend he didn't, though it was clear from his expression that he was frantically trying to understand the connection between us. "Of course," he said stiffly. "My father-in-law." Walter's smile widened. "Corbett and I go way back. High school buddies, and then he built half the structures my equipment gets used on. His crew did the foundation for this very building, as a matter of fact." I could almost see the calculations happening behind Blake's eyes as he reassessed me in light of this new information and its potential impact on his business pitch. From our table, I could hear fragments of Blake's colleagues discussing their presentation. One of them mentioned unsophisticated clients who don't understand the finer points of financial structuring, just need to be shown pretty pictures. Blake noticed me listening and shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I should get back to my associates. We are finalizing our presentation for tomorrow." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, the expansion proposal. I am looking forward to it. By the way, we are having a small charity gala tomorrow evening before the final decision. You should bring Corbett as your guest. I would love to catch up with him more, and it would give us a chance to chat informally about the proposal. Blake looked like he had swallowed something unpleasant, caught between his distaste for including me and his desire to please a potential major client. "That sounds wonderful," he managed, his smile strained. "I am sure Corbett would be delighted to attend." "Excellent," Walter clapped his hands together. "It is at the Drake Hotel, 7 p.m. Black tie, of course. I have a table reserved." As Blake walked back to his associates, visibly shaken, Walter turned to me with a mischievous grin. "You know, I was on the fence about their proposal, but now I think I need to take a much closer look at their company culture and values before making any decisions." For the first time since the Thanksgiving incident, I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I still wasn't sure if I should attend the gala, potentially creating more tension with Blake and, by extension, Amanda. But something about the opportunity to be seen as more than just an embarrassing relative was undeniably appealing. The rest of lunch with Walter was filled with catching up and reminiscing. By the time we finished, I had agreed to both the reunion committee and the gala the following evening. As Walter paid the bill, he leaned in with a twinkle in his eye. "Wear that Rolling Stones t-shirt under your tux tomorrow," he suggested. "You never know when it might come in handy." After lunch with Walter, I returned home with a mix of emotions. Part of me felt childish for even considering using Walter's position to teach Blake a lesson. But another part, the part that still burned from the public humiliation at Thanksgiving, felt a glimmer of satisfaction at the thought of Blake realizing I was more than he had assumed. My house seemed especially quiet as I hung up my suit and changed into more comfortable clothes. On the mantel, pictures of Margaret Amanda as a child, and now the grandchildren, reminded me of what really mattered: family. Despite everything, Blake was family now too, for better or worse. I picked up a photo of Amanda at her law school graduation. Margaret and I stood on either side of her, our faces bursting with pride. Margaret was already sick then, though we did not know how little time she had left. She had insisted on attending despite her fatigue, determined to see the culmination of our daughter's hard work and our sacrifices. I had worked 60-hour weeks for years to help pay for that education. Even took a second job for a while doing night security at a warehouse. My hands were permanently calloused, my back chronically sore, but watching Amanda accept that diploma made every hour of labor worthwhile. After Margaret died from cancer just 2 years later, Amanda was my lifeline. She called daily at first, came over weekly, to help with chores or just sit with me in my grief. That felt like a lifetime ago now. The calls had become monthly, then occasional. The visits even less frequent, usually just holidays or when she needed a babysitter in a pinch. I did not blame her for building her own life. That was what parents raised their children to do. But somewhere along the way, as she climbed the social ladder with Blake, I had been relegated to an embarrassing reminder of her humble beginnings rather than an integral part of her life. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Amanda. "Dad." Her voice sounded strained. "I just wanted to check that you got home okay yesterday. You left so suddenly." "I am fine, sweetheart," I assured her. "Just tired, like I said." A pause. "Listen about what Blake said. I am sorry. He can be thoughtless sometimes." It was a half-hearted apology at best, and notably not coming from Blake himself. I could hear the conflict in her voice, torn between defending her husband and acknowledging he had been wrong. "It is okay," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. "Your mom gave me that shirt, you know, at our first concert together." Another pause, longer this time. I did not know that she finally said, her voice softer. "Why did not you say something? Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. She did not answer directly, which was an answer in itself. "Dad, I heard from Blake that you know Walter Richards, from his company. So that was the real reason for her call. Not concern about my feelings, but concern about Blake's business opportunity. We went to high school together, I confirmed. He invited me to a charity gala tomorrow night. Blake suggested I attend. I could almost hear her relief through the phone. That is great. It would mean a lot to Blake if you could help with this account. It is really important for his career. I did not point out that just yesterday my presence at his table had been an embarrassment. Now that I might be useful, I was suddenly welcome. I will see what I can do, I said noncommittally. After hanging up, I called my old friend and former coworker Mike Gianelli. Mike had been my right-hand man on construction sites for 30 years before we both retired. If anyone would give me straight talk about the situation, it would be Mike. Let me get this straight, Mike said after I explained everything. This preppy son-in-law of yours embarrasses you in front of everyone, and now you have a chance to either help him land a huge account or watch him crash and burn. That is about the size of it, I confirmed. Mike laughed heartily. Corbett, in all the years I have known you, I have never seen you hold a grudge. You always said life is too short. But this guy, he needs to learn some respect. But what about Amanda? I asked. If Blake loses this account because of me, it could affect her too. Mike went quiet for a moment. Look, you remember when we were building the Monroe Tower? That young architect kept ignoring your advice about the support beams. I chuckled at the memory. He thought I was just a dumb construction worker who did not understand his brilliant design. And what happened? Mike prompted. The first test showed the stress points were exactly where I said they would be. They had to redesign half the structure. And after that, did that architect ever question your expertise again? No. In fact, he started asking for my input on other projects. Mike's voice grew serious. Sometimes people need to see the consequences of their arrogance before they can grow. Your son-in-law sees you as some relic he has to tolerate. Maybe he needs to understand that you have value he hasn't recognized. I considered Mike's words carefully. The thing is, I don't want revenge. I just want respect. Maybe those aren't so different in this case, Mike replied. Sometimes respect only comes after a reality check. After talking with Mike, I began to formulate a plan. Not to sabotage Blake, but to simply allow the truth to come to light in its own way. I spent the afternoon going through old photo albums and files in my garage, finding newspaper clippings about major projects. I had worked on photos of me receiving a community service award for the construction training program I had started for at-risk youth, and most importantly, documentation of my role as foreman on several of the buildings that now defined Chicago's skyline. Among the photos I found one that made me pause, Margaret and me, standing in front of the newly completed Richards Building in 1997. I was wearing that same Rolling Stones t-shirt rolled up at the sleeves to show arms that were considerably more muscular than, while holding the blueprint I had helped bring to life. Walter was beside us at the ribbon, cutting, all of us decades younger and beaming with pride. That evening, Walter called again. Everything's set for tomorrow night, old friend. I have had some interesting conversations with my board about the proposals we are considering. I think tomorrow might be quite educational for everyone involved. I had known Walter long enough to recognize the tone in his voice. Whatever he was planning went beyond a simple social event. Walter, I do not want to cause problems for Amanda, I cautioned. Trust me, Corbett. Sometimes the best lessons are the uncomfortable ones. Oh, and I found some interesting old photos for the reunion slideshow. Bringing them tomorrow. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a day to remember. The Drake Hotel stood as an elegant reminder of old Chicago, its limestone facade illuminated against the night sky. I arrived precisely at 7 wearing my freshly dry-cleaned tuxedo that I had last worn to Amanda's wedding. As Walter had suggested beneath it, I wore the Rolling Stones t-shirt, though it was completely hidden by the formal attire. The lobby bustled with Chicago's business elite in formal wear air kisses exchanged between people who measured relationships in networking opportunities rather than genuine connection. I felt out of place until Walter's booming voice cut through the crowd. "Corbett. There you are, right on time as always." Walter wore his tuxedo with the comfort of someone accustomed to formal events, a stark contrast to my own stiffness. He clapped me on the shoulder and guided me toward the grand ballroom where the gala was being held. "Blake is already here with his team," Walter informed me quietly. "They presented their proposal this afternoon. Very slick lots of charts and projections. My board was impressed with the numbers." My heart sank slightly. Despite everything, part of me had hoped the evening would lead to some recognition from Blake, not further tension. And if Walter was planning something that would affect the business deal, I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of it. "I should tell you," Walter continued, noticing my hesitation. "I also had my team do some background research on the partners at Blake's firm. Interesting findings about how they treat their subordinates and their, shall we say, less affluent clients." Before I could respond, we entered the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over dozens of elegantly set tables. A small orchestra played classical music in the corner, and waiters circulated with champagne flutes on silver trays. Walter guided me to a table near the front, where Blake was already seated with his business associates. Amanda was notably absent, as this was a business function rather than a social one. When Blake saw me approaching with Walter, his expressions cycled rapidly from surprise to discomfort to a forced smile. "Walter," he stood to shake hands. "And Corbett. I did not realize you would be at our table." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Walter replied jovially. "Corbett and I were just reminiscing about the Richards building downtown. His crew laid the foundation, you know." Blake's smile tightened. "Yes, you mentioned that. I had no idea my father-in-law had been involved in such significant projects." One of Blake's colleagues, a sharp-featured man introduced as Edward Whitman, raised an eyebrow. "You worked construction, Mr. Miller." His tone carried the faint suggestion that this was something to be embarrassed about, like admitting to a prison record. 40 years, I confirmed. Started as a laborer and worked my way up to site foreman and eventually project manager for Miller Construction. Edward exchanged a look with Blake that I pretended not to notice. "How interesting," he said, in a way that suggested it was anything but. The evening progressed with speeches about the charity being supported that night, something to do with urban development in underserved communities. I listened politely while aware of Blake's increasing tension beside me. He kept checking his phone, likely messaging his team about how to handle my unexpected presence. After dinner, Walter took to the podium as one of the event's major sponsors. He spoke eloquently about his company's commitment to ethical business practices and community investment values he said were instilled in him during his humble beginnings on Chicago's South Side. "I believe that character matters in business," Walter said, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "The buildings we construct, the deals we make, they should stand the test of time just like our reputations. That is why, when considering partners for our expansion project, we look beyond the numbers to the people behind them." Blake shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Walter continued. "I would like to call up someone who taught me about integrity in construction long before I could afford custom suits. My good friend Corbett Miller, who built half of downtown Chicago with his bare hands." A spotlight suddenly found me and 100 faces turned in my direction. Blake looked like he might choke on his water. With leaden feet, I made my way to the podium. Walter embraced me with a grin before stepping aside. I had not been prepared to speak and felt momentarily frozen before the expectant crowd. "Thank you, Walter," I began uncertainly. "I am not one for speeches. I have always believed actions speak louder than words. In construction, you cannot hide behind fancy presentations. Either the building stands or it does not. This earned a light chuckle from the audience. Walter mentioned the Richards Building. That was a special project because it challenged conventional wisdom about foundation depths in our soil conditions. The architects had one plan, but standing on that site, feeling the earth beneath my boots, I knew we needed to go deeper. It cost more up front, took longer, but 25 years later, that building hasn't settled an inch, while others around it have needed expensive repairs. Walter stepped forward with a remote control and clicked it. Behind me, a screen lowered from the ceiling, and suddenly there was a photo of a much younger me in that Rolling Stones t-shirt, sleeves rolled up, pointing at blueprints while surrounded by my crew. This was taken the day we broke ground, Walter explained to the audience. Corbett here insisted on additional core samples that ended up saving us millions in potential structural issues. His expertise, though not learned in any university, was worth more than 100 MBAs that day. I could feel Blake's eyes boring into me from his table. This was clearly not the evening he had anticipated. Walter clicked through more photos, me receiving a safety award, standing proudly in front of various Chicago landmarks under construction, shaking hands with the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. In many of them, I was wearing that same Rolling Stones shirt, which had been my lucky shirt on breaking ground days for years. But the real surprise came with Walter's next words. What many people don't know is that Corbett here also founded the Building Futures program, which has trained over 500 at-risk youth in construction trades. And the first fundraiser for that program, a benefit concert by none other than the Rolling Stones in 1982, which is why Corbett wears that famous t-shirt so proudly. It is not just a shirt. It represents thousands of changed lives. This was stretching the truth considerably. I had indeed started a training program, and there had been a benefit concert, though the Rolling Stones connection was tenuous at best. One of their road crew had helped organize it after I had done some emergency repairs at their venue. But the narrative Walter was spinning made for a better story, and I could see it landing with impact around the room. Blake looked like he might slide under the table. Several of Walter's board members were looking at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval, clearly connecting the dots between the son-in-law, who had mocked my trashy shirt, and the community builder being honored before them. Walter wrapped an arm around my shoulders. The expansion project we are undertaking requires partners who share our values of respect, community, and genuine expertise, not just people who look good in expensive suits. The pointed comment hung in the air for a moment, before Walter continued. That is why I am pleased to announce that while we have reviewed several excellent proposals, we will be engaging Miller Consulting, a firm run by graduates of Corbett's program, to oversee the community integration aspects of our expansion. This was news to me. I had no connection to any consulting firm, but before I could process this information, Walter was motioning to a young man in the back of the room. Marcus Rogers, please join us. A well-dressed black man in his 30s approached the podium. I recognized him immediately as one of the first participants in my youth training program, a teenager who had been on probation for vandalism when he joined us. He had become one of our greatest success stories, eventually earning an engineering degree. Mr. Miller gave me my first chance when no one else would, Marcus said to the crowd. Everything I have built since then stands on the foundation he helped me create. When Walter approached me about starting a consulting firm specifically for this project, I could think of no greater honor than to name it after the man who changed the trajectory of my life. The room broke into applause. I stood there genuinely moved and completely blindsided by Walter's machinations. As Marcus shook my hand warmly, I glanced toward Blake's table. His colleagues were whispering intensely, and Blake himself sat rigid with barely contained fury and humiliation. Walter had orchestrated a complete reversal. In the span of 48 hours, I had gone from being the embarrassing relative in a trashy t-shirt to a respected community builder whose approval seemingly carried weight with major business decisions. Blake's mockery had been exposed indirectly, but unmistakably, as not just unkind, but monumentally misinformed. As I returned to my seat, Blake excused himself abruptly and headed for the exit. The message had been received perhaps more forcefully than I had intended. After the gala, as attendees mingled with drinks, Walter pulled me aside. A bit theatrical, I admit, he chuckled. But sometimes people need to see themselves reflected in a mirror they cannot ignore. I shook my head, torn between gratitude and concern. Was any of that true? The consulting firm? All of it, Walter assured me. I have been meaning to bring Marcus into our projects for years. This just gave me the perfect opportunity. His firm will handle community relations for the expansion, while Blake's company will still manage the financial structuring. Smaller piece of the pie than they wanted, but still significant. I am not heartless, Corbett. Just unwilling to reward arrogance. As I was about to respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. We need to talk. Come over tomorrow morning. The next morning dawned clear and cold, a typical late November day in Chicago. I arrived at Amanda and Blake's house just after 9, parking my truck between two luxury SUVs in their driveway. The house looked different, somehow less intimidating than it had on Thanksgiving. Perhaps perspectives can change in just a few days. Amanda opened the door before I could knock, still in her bathrobe. Despite the hour, her eyes red-rimmed from what appeared to be a night without much sleep. Dad, she said simply, stepping aside to let me in. The immaculate house showed signs of disruption. Couch cushions, askew a half-empty wine glass on the coffee table, papers scattered across the normally pristine surfaces. Blake got home late last night, she began without preamble as we sat in the living room. He was upset. Said you and Walter Richards humiliated him at the gala. Is that true? I considered my words carefully. Walter shared some history about projects I worked on. It may have contradicted some assumptions Blake had made about me. Amanda ran a hand through her uncombed hair. He said Walter gave part of the contract to someone else because of you. That is not entirely accurate. Walter was always planning to split the project. He just made the announcement in a way that highlighted some connections to my past work. She looked at me with new eyes, as if seeing beyond the familiar father figure to something she had forgotten, or perhaps never fully appreciated. Blake was up half the night on the phone with his team, she continued. At first he was angry, blaming you for interfering. Then one of his colleagues mentioned looking you up. They found articles about your work about the youth program. Blake had no idea. I shrugged slightly. He never asked. The simple response hung between us, carrying the weight of years of assumptions and missed opportunities for understanding. He tried to call you a janitor once when talking to his parents. Amanda admitted shame coloring her cheeks. I corrected him, told him you were in construction management, but I did not know about all the rest. The buildings, the program. Why did not you ever tell me you never seemed interested? I replied honestly. After you went to law school, you were building a different kind of life. I was proud of you for that. Did not want to bore you with stories about pouring concrete and raising steel. Dad, she said, her voice breaking slightly. That is not boring. That is your life. That is what made my life possible. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings filling the space between us. Where is Blake now? I finally asked. Upstairs in his office, Amanda replied. He has been there since 5 this morning going through old press clippings online. I think he is in shock, honestly. As if summoned by our conversation, Blake appeared in the doorway. He had clearly not slept much, his normally perfect appearance, rumpled eyes, shadowed. He held a stack of printouts in his hand. "Corbett," he said stiffly, "I did not know you were here already." Amanda stood. "I will give you two some privacy." "No," Blake said quickly. "Stay. Please. This concerns you too." He approached slowly and sat across from me, placing the papers on the coffee table between us. I could see they were newspaper articles, some yellowed with age even in printout form. "I did some research last night," he began, his voice lacking its usual confident edge. "After the gala, I found these." He pushed the stack toward me. The top article showed a much younger version of myself standing beside the mayor at the opening of a community center I had helped build at reduced cost. The headline read, "Local Builder Gives Back." I also found these. Blake continued, pulling out his phone. He showed me a series of photos he had apparently requested from his parents overnight. They showed the interior of Richard and Veronica's Florida vacation home, specifically a stunning two-story great room with exposed wooden beams and a massive stone fireplace. "My parents' place in Naples," Blake explained. "The one they would not stop talking about at Thanksgiving." He scrolled to a final image, a small brass plaque mounted beside the fireplace that read, "Crafted by Miller Construction, 2007. "I remember that job," I said, genuinely surprised. "Custom beam work was tricky to source. We had to find a specialty supplier in Montana." Blake set down his phone, looking more humbled than I had ever seen him. "My father said you were just the contractor they hired. He never mentioned—" He trailed off, then continued more directly. "He said you were just the worker." "Just the worker," I repeated softly. "You know, Blake, someone has to actually build the world that people like you and your father move through. Someone has to know how to make things that last." The words held no bitterness, just a simple truth that seemed to land with unexpected weight. "I should not have said what I did about your shirt," Blake said finally. "It was inappropriate and disrespectful. I apologize." It was the most genuine thing I had ever heard him say, though I could tell the words didn't come easily to him. Amanda spoke up. "Dad, when you left Thanksgiving, Emma asked me about your shirt. I realized I did not know why it was special to you. I should have known that." I nodded, accepting both Blake's apology and Amanda's acknowledgement. "Your mother gave me that shirt at our first concert together," I told Amanda again. "The night she told me she loved me for the first time. I wore it on special days on job sites for luck. It might look trashy to some people, but to me, it is treasure." Blake looked genuinely contrite. "I misjudged you, Corbett. Completely. But I still don't understand why Walter Richards would go to such lengths at the gala. Was he trying to punish me for what happened at Thanksgiving?" "I do not think Walter is that petty," I replied truthfully. "I think he wanted to make a point about assumptions and respect. The contract division was probably always part of his plan. The way he presented it was just Walter being Walter." Blake nodded slowly, processing this. "He seems to think very highly of you." "We go back a long way," I acknowledged. "Friends see the best in each other." Amanda reached over and took my hand. "I have not been a very good daughter these past few years, have I?" "You have been busy building your own life," I said. "That is what you are supposed to do. Not at the expense of forgetting where I came from," she replied firmly. "Or who helped me get here." A small voice from the doorway interrupted us. Grandpa Emma stood in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Behind her, Liam peeked around the corner. I opened my arms, and both children rushed over for a hug. Their simple, unguarded affection was a balm to the complicated adult emotions filling the room. Are you still sad about your shirt? Emma asked innocently. No, sweetheart, I assured her. Everything is fine now. Blake watched the interaction, then said tentatively, Perhaps you could tell us more about some of your projects, Corbett. The children might enjoy hearing about how their grandfather built parts of our city. It was a small olive branch, but a significant one. I would like that, I replied. 1 month later, we gathered for Christmas at my house. It was the first time Amanda Blake and the children had celebrated a holiday in my modest home in years. Amanda had initially suggested hosting again, but I had insisted it was my turn. The weeks following Thanksgiving and the gala had brought unexpected changes. Blake's company had indeed secured part of Walter's expansion project, though a smaller portion than originally hoped for. The setback had been a humbling experience for Blake, but perhaps a necessary one. More significantly, Amanda had begun asking questions about my work, about her mother, about our lives, before she had become so focused on climbing the social ladder. It was as if a door long closed had been reopened, allowing fresh air into our relationship. Blake, too, had shown a different side. His initial embarrassment had evolved into something approaching genuine interest. He had asked about several of my major projects, even accompanying me to a site where one of my former crew members was now a contractor himself. The Christmas tree in my living room was modest, compared to the designer creation that had adorned Amanda and Blake's home, but the handmade ornaments, many crafted by Amanda as a child, carried a history no store-bought decoration could match. The grandchildren tore through their presents with typical enthusiasm, while the adults exchanged more modest gifts. When it came time for Blake to open his gift from me, an unexpected hush fell over the room. The package was small and flat. Blake unwrapped it carefully to reveal a framed black and white photograph, me, as a young foreman, standing proudly in front of the Chicago skyline, under construction, wearing the Rolling Stones t-shirt. I thought you might like to have this for your office, I explained. To remember that appearances do not always tell the whole story. Blake studied the photograph with genuine appreciation. I would be honored to display this, Corbett. Thank you. His gift to me was equally thoughtful, a leather-bound album containing research he had done on all my major projects, complete with photographs and news clippings. It must have taken weeks to compile. I wanted to create a proper record of your work, he explained somewhat awkwardly. For the grandchildren to know their legacy. Amanda had tears in her eyes as she handed me her gift, a brand new Rolling Stones t-shirt, along with a note that simply read, "New memories to come." Later, as we sat around the dinner table, a very different scene from Thanksgiving unfolded. Blake, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, rather than his usual formal attire, asked thoughtful questions about my early days in construction. The children listened wide-eyed to stories of buildings rising from empty lots of challenges, overcome through ingenuity and hard work. Looking around at my family, I realized that the humiliation of Thanksgiving had led to something unexpected, a new foundation for our relationship, built on greater understanding and respect. Some structures need to be torn down before they can be rebuilt properly. The following: Thanksgiving. I arrived at Amanda and Blake's wearing my Rolling Stones t-shirt, proudly no longer hidden beneath a button-up. Blake, seeing me at the door, smiled with genuine warmth. "Great shirt, Corbett," he said, and meant it. I had one made for myself, actually. Thought we could match this year. He opened his suit jacket to reveal his own Rolling Stones shirt underneath a peace offering, and acknowledgement rolled into one. In his office downtown, Blake now kept the framed photo of me at the construction site prominently displayed. When clients asked about it, he would tell them proudly about his father-in-law, who had helped build Chicago, about the lessons he had learned about judging people by appearances, and about the t-shirt that was worth more than all his designer suits combined. Life teaches us that dignity is not found in the clothes we wear or the status we achieve. True worth comes from the legacy we build, the lives we touch, and the respect we earn through our actions. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is not angry words, but quiet dignity that allows the truth to emerge in its own time. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on appearances, or discovered something surprising about someone you thought you knew? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of respect and redemption touched something in you, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that true worth often lies beneath the surface. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the things others mock as trashy might just be your most precious treasures.